and whether that's completely revising the model or maybe just making a tweak, like adding more points for a webinar or less points for email opens. Okay, hands down. Have you ever had to add a new field to a form or change an existing field, whether that is making your fields GDPR compliant, changing a qualifying question, just changing a tick list? Have you guys ever had to do that? Okay, I see lots of hands. Next question. Have you ever decided to make a change such as like a secondary CTA on all of your gated content confirmation emails? For example, maybe you used to promote a free trial, and then you are now promoting requested demo. Anybody ever had to do that? Okay. This one is probably fewer of you, but hopefully not bringing up too many painful memories. Have you ever gone through a rebrand? We just did this in February. That is a lot of work. Okay, cool. All right. And have you ever discovered after a webinar that there were a bunch of people who had webinar registration errors and you did not know that they did not make it into your webinar platform? Hands up. Oh, yes. Okay. Hands down. If you need to grab a tissue, take a deep breath. I know that was kind of a reminder of some painful things. But making these changes is much less painful with dry methodology. And I'm going to explain to you how you can dry clean your instance so that this will be much cleaner in the future. Okay, so let's talk about dry versus wet. So first of all, I have a revelation for you guys. You are a programmer. Even if you don't know a lick of code, or maybe you just know some like really basic HTML for coding emails, when you are in Marketo and you are building smart lists and building smart campaigns, you're actually writing SQL, which is a programming language, database programming language. You're not obviously like typing, select star from and all of the SQL language, but Marketo is a visual SQL editor. So we're going to use this programming strategy called dry and apply it to Marketo, because Marketo, you're programming Marketo every single day. So dry stands for don't repeat yourself. I love an acronym. I love a pun, so this really speaks to me. And the opposite of dry is wet, which is right every time. I do want to give a shout out to David Kreider, who presented at the ChiMUG a few months ago, who mentioned this strategy, and it was kind of a light bulb moment for me, because I realized that this was something I had always thought was important, but I never really knew that there was like an actual strategy behind it. And I think it's a really, really good way to think about how to manage your Marketo instance. So the basics of dry cleaning in Marketo is that any action or asset that could affect multiple marketing programs should be moved into a central location. Because then when you're doing dry methodology, anything that could be used in multiple places, you want to just write it in one place and reference it in other different places. That way, if you ever have to make a change, you're only making the change once. It makes your code much cleaner, makes it much easier for a colleague to go in and understand your code. So how does this work in Marketo? You want to, as much as possible, centralize assets in Design Studio. You may hear this referred to as global assets, particularly global forms or something people talk about a lot. You want to, as much as possible, centralize smart campaigns in operational programs. This will save you a ton of time building Marketo programs. It reduces errors because you only have to build, QA, test one thing. It makes it much easier to update because you only have to update it in one place. And it also makes it easy to get a snapshot and understand your operational processes. Even if you're, like me, a team of one right now, eventually somebody else may come in, a consultant may come in, you may get a promotion and not be directly in Marketo, and you may have somebody, a direct report come into Marketo, and you want to make it easy for other people to understand what's going on in your instance, so they're not wasting a lot of time jumping around trying to figure out what's going on. So So first, we're going to talk about how to dry out Design Studio. And a really quick win that you can get is using snippets. Snippets is a really cool Marketo functionality, which is reusable HTML components that you can pull into emails and landing pages. And you can also segment them using dynamic content. They're independent of templates, which is pretty cool. I think some of the best use cases for snippets is headers and footers, which this is a screenshot from my own instance. We're primarily using them for headers and footers. And I would love to hear from you guys if you post in the chat some other use cases that you have for snippets. But basically, anytime that you have content that you're going to be reusing all the time, like make it a snippet, pull it in, standardizes it, makes it so much easier, makes it brand standard. And an example of using snippets with dynamic content is, for example, if your company operates globally and you want a local or regional footer to show to the recipient based on their location, you can have your footers and snippets have dynamic content in the footer section of the email, and it will just populate for you. Okay, next is global forms. I will give the caveat that this is not an extensive explanation of forms best practices. Brooke is going to be talking about that in her session later this month, 409 your forms. But what I just really wanted to focus on is global forms. In almost all cases, you want to have your forms live in Design Studio. The opposite of this would be a local form that lives in your Marketo program. But when you have a global form, if you need to change a field, add a field, remove a field, you only have to do it in one place. So, give you a personal story. When I set up my very first Marketo instance, we were building it out, and I don't know why we chose local forms. I think I even asked my boss, and she said, do local forms, and I said, okay. So we built out, I mean, after a year, we probably had like, 15 or 20 webinars, 30 pieces of gated content, a handful of contact forms. And then we decided that we needed to change the pick list on our company size field. We want to change the pick list values. And that meant that I would have to change it on every single form and QA every single form. I did not want to do that. And then I was like, well, I think this is a really good time that we can move to using global forms. And as a spring cleaning, it was a little bit of effort, but it meant that in the future, anytime we needed to make that change, it would be very quick and very easy. So there are some caveats about global forms. One is that acquisition program is not automatically set. If you have a local form and a local program and a new person fills out that form, it will set the acquisition program automatically. If you use a global form, you need to have a flow step that will set the acquisition program. But this is really easy. Just build it into your program, all your program templates, and you never have to think about it. The other major caveat is that you need a constraint on your filled out form trigger. So if it's a Marketo landing page, you use the trigger web page is. And if you have a Marketo form embedded on your corporate website, which is what we have, you would use refer contains, and then you paste the URL. This is super easy. It's really easy to, put this filled out form, which, refer contains or a web page is in your program templates. And then you just have to pop in the URL there. Two other kind of fiddly things that I did want to mention. If you have workspaces and partitions, you cannot share forms across workspaces. But if you have workspaces and partitions, you're probably aware that there are a lot of fiddly details. And if you don't know what workspaces and partitions is, you're fine. Also, there is a new feature that just came out last week called Program Member Custom Fields that does not work with global forms. I'm not clear whether they're going to make it work with global forms or if that is just a restriction of the way the feature is built, but I just wanted to mention that. Okay. Next thing we're going to talk about is confirmation emails. this is like a major aha moment that I was like super excited about that we did earlier this year. I will give credit to Natalie Larkin, who is our digital pie consultant. This was her idea, and I think it's genius, and I hope you guys implement this. So first, let's talk about the wet way, which is probably how you have it set up and how I've always had it set up. So you have gated content, like a white paper on your website. Somebody fills out the form, and one of the flow steps in your, fills out form smart campaign is send email. And it's sending confirmation email that has like the name of the asset, a link to it, maybe a little bit more content, maybe a secondary CTA, like, request a demo. And all of those emails live locally in the website content program. The thing is, these emails are probably all essentially the same, like same format, same content, other than, the name and the link and all that. And if you need to update the email design or you go through a massive rebrand, you would have to update all of those programs, all those emails. And we had, like 30 pieces of gated content, like a dozen webinars. It was like, would have been a lot of work. So the dry way, it sounds like there's somebody who, okay, thank you. So the dry way is to have a single tokenized confirmation email in Design Studio for all of your website content. So you set up your program like you normally would with program tokens. Your confirmation email has those same tokens in it, and it lives in Design Studio. And when the program sends that global email, it will pull in the program tokens from the program. This was like such a game changer for us, in that we only had to create one tokenized email. And if you're moving from from wet to dry, you do need to go back into every program and swap out the fills out form, in the fills out form smart campaign. You do need to swap out the email. That's pretty straightforward. And this is great. Like, we're talking about, well, we might actually want to like update this email. Like, it matches our branding, but like, how can we make it more interesting? We only have to change one email. I will give you a tip that when you're building the email, you can't like send a sample email the way you normally would, because it doesn't know what program tokens to pull in. So when you're setting up your program, just send an actual email, but send it to yourself. It'll pull in the tokens. You can make sure they render properly. Picture speaks 1,000 words, so this is what it looks like, right? So here is my Design Studio email, my program tokens for content name, for the header. This is, some extra information about the content button. Text probably says download now, but could say whatever. And then behind here is a link. So this is exactly how it would probably look if it were tokenized locally, but it's a global email in Design Studio. And then in my Smart Campaign for my engagement report here are all the tokens that you just saw in the previous email. And then the send email step is just sending that global content confirmation email. I really hope that some of you guys are able to implement this. I'd love to hear how this helps. I feel like this is like just the biggest game changer. Okay, moving on. This is how it looks in your inbox. Ta-da, pulled in all of the local tokens and everything works. And this will save you guys a ton of time. All right, so enough about Design Studio. Now we're going to talk about operational programs and alerts. So the first thing that I think that should absolutely be an operational program that for some reason some people don't have fully centralized is lead scoring. So I remember when I first started at my last company, Thousand Eyes, we had lead scoring like in all these different programs. Like in a webinar, when somebody registered for a webinar on the filled out form Smart Campaign, it would like increase their lead score by 30. And I was like, how do you keep track of this? And if you need to change it, if you decide, oh, webinar should be, 50, you have to change it in every single program. And that is not scalable. It makes it really hard to actually see what your general scoring strategy is. Does your scoring strategy in Marketo match the spreadsheet that you probably built to develop all your scoring? So highly, highly recommend, if your lead scoring is not centralized in one operational program, please do this. So the sort of next level of this is to add scoring tokens. Honestly, I only fairly recently even realized that this score token existed. Take a look at, there's a lot of different things you can do with tokens, but this score one is really unique. Makes it super easy. If you need to update it, you just change it in the token, which we all know changing things in tokens is a lot faster than clicking into smart campaigns. It also means, I guess here's a show of hands. How many of you have a behavior score and a demographic score that roll up into a person score? Yeah? So anytime, for example, let's say fills out form is 30 points, you have to add 30 points to behavior score and to person score. If you have a score token, you only have to change that once, and you make sure that it's always the same in both of them. I'll show you what I'm talking about. So here is a snapshot of the tokens from my lead scoring program, and you can see that there are these star, Marketo loves its icon. So here's the score token, and here's all of the different values, and you can see here they have the plus showing that they do math like a score. You could also have negative if you have some sort of decay. And here's how it looks in your smart campaign. So you've got for the forms content, which I can see it's 10 points, and when somebody fills out a form, it changes both their person score and their behavior score. And if I decide I want to change forms content to 15, I just change it in one place and it will update here. Okay. There's a lot of other things that you can dry clean in operational programs. I'm not going to go into details, but just keep thinking about what you can centralize. So enrichment, subscriptions, privacy and compliance, that all should definitely be centralized, because you want to make sure that whatever strategy you have for maintaining compliance that you've worked out with your legal and security teams, you want that all in one place. So you can make sure that's working correctly. And if there are any issues, you can go back and find exactly where the issue is. Data management normalization, pull that all into one operational program. You can do the lead sourcing operational program, which will set the lead source, and if you want lead source detail based on what the different criteria are. So I'd love to hear from you guys, other creative ways that you are using operational programs to dry clean your instance. And the last thing I want to talk to you guys about is error notifications. I'll tell you a story. When I was working at Webgility, we were using GoToWebinar, and it was about an hour before our webinar, and I happened to logged into Marketo, and I saw how many people were registered for my webinar, and then I logged into GoToWebinar, and I saw that the number in GoToWebinar was much lower, and I was freaking out, and I started looking in Marketo, and I realized that all these people had program status registration error, and I didn't know what to do, and I started panicking, and I called GoToWebinar support. Didn't have phone support at Marketo. I didn't know what to do. I manually had to register those people one by one in GoToWebinar. But if I had error notifications on, I would have known when the first one got triggered, and I could have investigated it. And what would have been even worse is if I'd only realized this after the webinar, and then people wouldn't be able to access our awesome content. So Marketo does notify you about many different types of errors, Salesforce sync errors. If you abort a batch campaign, there's a whole bunch of things in notifications, but for some reason, webhook errors and launch point errors will not notify you. They're these hidden issues that you have to uncover, but it's really easy to set up, and I highly recommend you do. So first, you're going to create an alert email, just super simple, tokenized. You don't have to make it fancy. And then you set up a smart campaign to send you the alert whenever the error occurs. So there are a whole list of system tokens. At the end of this presentation, there's a link to Marketo docs for system tokens. But the two that are really important are the send alert info, and that's this special one that pulls in the person's name, a link to their Marketo record, if they're in your CRM, a link to that record, the date that the date time stamp the issue occurred, and then also trigger.name, which is the smart campaign that caused the error. It's a little, there's like two that are very similar, but trigger.name is whichever, like if it was like your webinar filled out form that was the one that caused the error, then that would be your trigger.name. So that tells you exactly where you need to go look to, see where the issue is. I will also recommend that you send these alerts to an email alias. That way, because if it's just going to you, if you are on vacation, if you are out of the office, if you leave the company because you get a better job, those alerts will just go into ether. So if you just send them to an alias that's like maybe, even if you're like me and your MOPS team of one, like your boss, another colleague, maybe like in demand gen, that way there's always some people on that alias. I did learn the other day that like if you have like Google groups, you have to make sure that that alias can accept mail from anyone, not just internally. So you do want to test that. So here's what this alert email looks like, right? Like super simple, webhook error for trigger.name. And then in here is the send alert info. You can make your alert emails a lot more complex, include a lot more information depending upon who it's going to. This is basically going to me. I know exactly what to do. This is like, pretty simple. And this is how it looks in my smart campaign. So it's webhook is called, and what you want here is this constraint error type is not successful. And that is the trigger that there was a problem getting your webhook sent. So this, for example, is for our customer conference, Activate Live, which is later this month. And we use this platform 6Connects. And I want to know immediately if somebody doesn't get registered in 6Connects, because I need to go and fix it, because I want to make sure every single person who registered for Activate Live gets in 6Connects. There can be no exceptions. So when that error notification is triggered, you use the send alert flow step, which if you're not familiar with this, it's different than send email. Send alert is like for Marketo to send an internal email. Here you choose send to none, because if this pick list here, I think is like the sales owner, and you don't want to send it to the sales owner. This is not like a MQL alert. And then you put into other emails, you put your alias. And then the last way that you would trigger this is for a webinar. If you're using go to webinar on 24, the new Zoom integration, and they use the standard launch point integrations, you would use program status has changed, new status is webinar registration error. And this is what the alert email looks like. Super simple. It's really easy to see in your inbox and easy to see that you have this issue and you can go investigate it. So that's all I have. Just remember, good cleaning saves clothes, and good cleaning saves Marketo. Happy to open up to questions, comments. Andy or Brooke, if you guys have been moderating the chat, if there's anything, love to chat with you guys.
I'm happy to raise my hand, Amy. I have some questions.
Okay, sure.
About that was a really great presentation. I just learned a ton.
Thank you.
That webhook error smart list or smart campaign, do you build that as an operational program, or do you build that smart campaign into each program?
I would build that as operational. Now, as it happens, there's only one program using that right now, but we could be using the same platform in the future. And because you build it operationally, because you have that trigger.name, let's say you were using webhooks for your webinar provider, and you had several live webinars, registering at the same time, it would tell you which webinar the error was for.
Okay. And my second question was the tokenized, not even tokenized, the global confirmation emails.
Yeah.
That you host in the design studio. We have confirmation emails that are templatized in our program templates.
Yeah.
But if you have like, what if your confirmation email is different between a webinar, a content download, and like an event? Would you have
Yeah.
multiple emails in your design studio?
Yeah, I think this is most useful for gated content because that lives like evergreen. I feel like this is less crucial for like a webinar because you probably only have a few webinars live at any time. And if you want to change the webinar confirmation email, you know, you can just change it for that one. But then again, if you have on-demand webinars and they get an on-demand email, you know, definitely making that global. But yeah, you could totally have the same way you have like, you know, half a dozen forms. You could have half a dozen confirmation emails, but that's a lot fewer than 30, 50, 100, depending upon how big your instance is.
Exactly. Okay, thanks.
I'll take a go.
Okay, we do have some other questions too. So when everyone's wrapped up, I'll jump in at the end. No, please go ahead.
Okay.
So I really like the piece about referencing kind of global emails and local programs and using local tokens to kind of pre-populate those. I was wondering about the preview button that's in your send flow step, if that will work. If you have a global email with local tokens and you preview it inside of the local of the Smart campaign locally, will that still populate, or do you still run into that same?
For the global confirmation emails, you have to send a sample of it. So when you're first like setting it up, it may make sense, like when you're first creating this email, is just create it within a program and then clone it over to Design Studio. So that when you're creating the program, you can like really quickly like preview with the local tokens, and then move it to Design Studio when you've like finalized it.
Okay. Yeah, we had a workflow that was kind of like that actually with one client where actually you don't even have to clone it. There's a move command that's inside of
Okay.
So just move.
I can never remember what you can move and what you have to clone. So okay, you can move emails. Okay.
When you get into the workspace and, you know, to your point about workspaces and partitions,
well, yeah.
and you know, that's a whole different thing where you do have to do a whole bunch of different cloning around that piece. But I like your point about designing the email inside of the local program so you can reference all of those local tokens directly inside of the editor and not have to kind of reference in. And then the other piece that I wanted to kind of bring up quickly was that you can use those local tokens inside of your snippets and then put those inside of your emails as well too.
Yes, I love it.
Andy, sorry.
Yeah, no, you're fine. We had an additional question looking for potential tips while you're in sort of the middle of the transition from wet to dry.
I think when you're just trying to transition like one particular program or one particular thing from wet to dry, or when you're trying to move like your entire instance from wet to dry.
I think this refers to more the whole system transition. I think maybe is there like something to attack first, or, you know, those types of things, I think is what she's looking for.
Yeah, I think often what you'll do first is whichever your current pain point is. So are you going through rebrand? Are you trying to change your forms? Is your lead scoring a mess? Did somebody ask you about lead scoring you can't answer? So like pick whatever is like bothering you the most, I guess. And then think about also like what is most impactful and what's like most, future proof. For us, we moved to the global confirmation emails because we were going through a rebrand. And like I said, at Webgility, we moved to global forms because we were asked to change the form, and I'm like, this is not scalable. So yeah, just, pick your poison. I would say like, if you pick, if you have to pick one to start with, I'd start with the webinar and webhook registration errors. Those will kill you. Like, and your DG team's gonna be really ticked if they find out that like people didn't get registered. And if you have a certain webinar provider that has not had its adapter updated in many years, and many of us are irritated about it, you will find that it disconnects from LaunchPoint all the time, and you need to fix it all the time, and you want to know immediately. So that would be my first tip.
Those people are
What else
fairly
we
far
got?
down the tunnel too. Sorry,
Awesome.
just to speak to that, yeah, they're just further down, right? So that those are really valuable too. So for
Well,
those
exactly.
webinars.
Yeah, no, you definitely don't want someone having a bad brand experience with a webinar in general, but certainly not if it's lower funnel content.
Yeah, yeah.
If anyone has additional questions, we're happy to stay on for a little bit, or also feel free to send an email and we can pass it along to Amy. It looks like you did have one more question come in, looking for a little bit of additional clarity around the error notification smart list. Was on the last slide.
So the first slide that I showed was a webhook. The trigger for the webhook, and the last one that I showed was a trigger for a webinar using the LaunchPoint integration.
Yeah, so in that case, if you are having someone fill out a Marketo form and then the LaunchPoint API is sending them over and a error comes back when their status changes to error, you would get an alert in the system instead of just going and check.
Yeah. So basically, if you are using like a webinar or virtual event provider, there's basically two ways to integrate them. One, so go to webinar 24, Zoom, ReadyTalk maybe, use like what's called like a LaunchPoint connector. It's like been approved by Marketo. It's like there's a small number of them, and you connect it in admin, and then when you create your webinar program, there's like that connect, I forget what the exact language is, but it's like connect to event provider. And then Marketo and your event provider know that this program and this webinar are attached, and when somebody's program status is changed to registered in Marketo, it's supposed to add them to the webinar vendor. In that case, if there's a problem, it will kick back and change their status to registration error. So that's when you would use the second one. Other platforms like newer webinar vendors, the virtual event platform that we're using for Activate Live, which is called 6Connect, they use a webhook to register. So it's, the flow step is call webhook, and you don't know whether that webhook was successful unless you have an error notification. So that's the other scenario. Does that make sense? Fadi, it looks like you asked that question. Okay.
Yes.
Fadi says yes. Okay. Anybody else, feel free to come off of mute and ask your questions. Love to hear what you guys want to hear about. Looking, let's see. Chloe, you and Beth were talking about the refer contains. Yeah, you have to play around a little bit with the exact exact how you write the URL for refer contains. Just test. When you set up anything, like you add a new program, you always want to test to make sure that you pasted the URL in properly. I don't know exactly what the standard is. I'm sure Sanford Whiteman knows and could tell you the technical reason why that works or doesn't, but whatever you figure out works, write it in your documentation for sure.
I think Sanford's office hours are in 2 hours from now, actually, if you want to ask him directly.
Yeah, maybe I should do that. Does anybody have any other ideas of things that they're using snippets for, or other things that they're dry cleaning that they want to tell the world about?
So I actually have one I can add in. It's been really useful lately. So I set up an operational program that utilizes a temp field for the acquisition program. So it's just temp acquisition program. And essentially what I do is I look for a program status to be changed with someone being added into the system, but acquisition program not being set. And this allows me to catch programs that are not adding acquisition program. With the trigger name, you can't actually write into the acquisition program from that operational program with trigger.name, but it will allow you to capture them. So that's been really helpful in quickly locating. You can send an alert off of that too. Those programs that I might otherwise miss out on acquisition with.
Yeah, using proxy fields can be really helpful in Marketo to kind of like, get around some of the limitations for sure. I feel like somebody could probably do an entire presentation on like getting around Marketo's limitations. Actually, Keith Nyberg gave a really great presentation at the San Diego MUG a couple weeks ago that I highly recommend watching. He talked about how you can like basically hack segmentations. There are certain things that are like not available in segmentation, but by using like adding to static lists, then you can like make segmentations much more powerful. It was like really, I think just like also adding to lists in general is a really great way to like sometimes, use your smart list or use add choices and stuff that can kind of get around some of Marketo's limitations.
Agreed.
Yeah, I kind of like that piece that you're talking about the scoring programs too, and making sure that they're tokenized. Like I think that there's one thing, I think you made a pretty good argument for why you'd want to do that for consistency, especially when you're rowing up to person score. But I think the other piece of that too is that by making your flow step on your changing your score tokenized, that's also, as long as you're very diligent about that at the beginning of your scoring program, that's collectively exhaustive. So you'll never get into a spot where you have to sift back through your entire program and kind of say, did I forget to add this in one specific spot? It's all I think the other piece too, just to talk about for dry cleaning, and I really hope I didn't mention this in the last of these series. It's been a while, but I always try and export my scoring values out of my database once every quarter, once every 6 months, and then use that to build a histogram. And then basically you have the histograms to compare against each other. You can do a comparative histogram, use a BI tool, use Excel, depends on the size of your database, but that gives you a kind of a good reference point to kind of say, okay, how is the model altogether changing? Think of it as a statistician, right? Where modality inside of if you think of your score, your behavior score and your demographic score as a statistical distribution. And then it gives you kind of a sense to say, well, what are those values doing? Should I change the values themselves? And ideally you have those inside of the tokenized so that you can quickly make those changes. But that gives you a better overall sense of, should I do plus 30? Should I do plus 15? Should I do plus 85? That's a good spring cleaning.
That's a really, Yeah, I've definitely been asked before, like, how many people are like on the threshold? What's our like historical scoring? I could talk about lead scoring a lot, but I also have some painful memories, so I won't. It's always a little bit of tension with lead scoring, right, guys?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Well, definitely if you have multiple brands that are inside of it, like you're talking about a rebrand, but I think we've got a couple of different articles and some content recently about what if you're running more than one brand out of your instance, or more than one, let's say that you have an enterprise that's running Marketo that has 2 or more business units that are all tied within the one instance, right? So thank God you've got some snippets and score and all of these. This would be applicable to all of that content times whatever the number of business units that you have, right?
Oh my God, yeah. I'd love to hear what other people are using snippets for. I feel like they're really powerful, but I think I'm not taking advantage of them enough. If anybody wants to give me some ideas. I'm gonna start calling on people. No, I'm just kidding.
You should.
So we were recently actually able to take content AI code and put it into a snippet, and then leverage that in a larger variety of places without having the limitation of standard placement on a landing page for content AI.
Oh.
And it still functions.
JD, I see your wheels turning.
I wanted to ask you about that, JD. Like you've done all these presentations about RTP and about website personalization, and all that's JavaScript code. Have you ever thrown any of that JavaScript code inside of the HTML block of a snippet? Are you muted?
You're muted, JD.
Yeah, you're going
Not
vodka.
muted, but we're not hearing
There we
you.
go. There we go. It was a headset mute. I didn't get in trouble for it, but I kind of broke their code down once to get it to work in a snippet. But yeah, it's definitely powerful. I think snippets for me is always the secondary CTA options, and I think a lot of those also is where content AI is most powerful. So I did combine the two. Brooke, maybe you found a newer way to do it, but when I did it a couple of years ago, I had to break their code down and include the kind of a raw version, which somehow just worked, and it was nice. But yeah.
I'm trying to remember a limitation that I had found with them, and gosh, you know, Brooke, it was that thing that you and I and Andy were doing like a year or two ago. I think it was a year ago. And I can't remember. We had a snippet in there, and I was talking to Michael Guzman about this, and he was saying, "Yeah, I don't think that's going to work." And I can't remember. It was a token or something like that that wasn't resolving properly once you used it inside of the local once you brought the snippet into the local program for content, it wasn't resolving a local token if the email or the landing page wasn't inside of the local program.
Is that specific to content AI?
No, it wasn't specific to content AI. But it was one of
for those of you, yeah,
test and preview your snippets before you're using them inside.
Yeah. For those of you not familiar with Content AI, it is a Marketo add-on. JD Nelson is kind of known as an authority on it. He presented twice at Summit about Content AI, and his presentation is available on YouTube. I just recommended it to somebody today. So if you want to learn more about that, just Google JD Nelson Content AI, and you'll find his presentation. JD, you're a celebrity.
Huh? Sweet.
I know. Anybody else?
I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. I don't think we have other questions that have come in, but if you do have additional questions after, always feel free to message any of us. We can either get them to Amy, or if you have direct resource contact to Amy, reach out.
Yeah, here, I'll paste my LinkedIn profile. You guys are welcome to message me on LinkedIn. Yeah, please, I'd love to hear what you guys are doing. If you have questions, want to talk stuff through. This is something I'm really passionate about, and it's really exciting for me. It's really exciting for me to sort of synthesize all these ideas that I had into sort of one thesis, with a pun, even better. So, so thank you guys so much for having me. This was really a treat. I didn't mention up top, my dad is from Chicago, so I feel a lot of affinity for Chicagoland. It was really nice to join you guys, and thanks everybody who joined.